Welcome to the lab, everybody. We got a special guest and a special presentation for you tonight, and I think that you'll enjoy. We got one of my favorites. 1/3 of the Witness Box, author of The New Evil. He also contributed to the mass murder database at Columbia University, the largest mass murder database in the world.
I co-created that with
took some work, didn't it?
Yep, it's 119 years of every mass murder that ever happened in the world that we could get our hands on.
Yeah, and that is the topic of tonight's discussion, the epidemic of mass murder, and it's going to be this is something that you're an authority on, you're an expert on. I mean, this isn't something that you just one day said, oh, I kind of have an interest in this, I'll read about it a little bit. I mean, talk to me a little bit about what you got yourself into while studying this. I wouldn't call it a phenomenon, but for lack of a better term,
it's a phenomenon.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I'm not the best with when I think of, this is just how dumb I am. When I think of phenomenon, I think like, whoa, that's awesome, but that's not what it means.
Okay, I mean,
and we're off to a roaring start here, folks.
Well, to answer your question, my interest in mass murder really arose out of work I was doing with my mentor, Michael Stone, the late Michael Stone, that I wrote The New Evil with, because I really came at it as a personality disorders, serial killer, sexual assault, serious mental illness expert. And Dr. Stone had been very interested in mass murder and had written an early article on that subject, and was one of these people who kept a database. You could count on a few hands the number of people around the world, mostly in the US, who were keeping these databases and trying to make sense out of mass murder. There were all kinds of disparities in the definition of what it even means. Most of the interest was in mass shootings, and some of them weren't even properly distinguishing between mass murder and serial killing and spree killing. What has happened is that, as time went on, we got more systematized with these things. And by the time you get to the database I did with Raggy Gergis and our team at Columbia, we got really, I think, a lot more sophisticated about it in terms of being able to find out some really meaningful stuff. But I think we need to begin with a definition of what mass murder even means. Would that be okay? Or am I?
That's a perfect place to start, because
turning this into a lecture. Okay.
No, because that's why you're here. But because you're the expert on this, and like I said, it's not something that I've ever studied. But spending some time with you, once a week, we all spend a good amount of time, three hours, sometimes 4 a week, and I have learned a lot to distinguish between why they're important to distinguish. Okay. And so, yeah, please. I mean, that's a great place to start. Unless you want me to share do you want me to share the?
We'll get to that later.
Okay, all right.
I know what you're talking about, but
Easter egg for later.
Okay, so first of all, somewhere around the late 60s, early 70s, you start seeing people that are trying to examine these different phenomena of murder. And let me be clear, by the way, because I hear people use the words homicide and murder interchangeably. Homicide is the killing of one or more other people, but it's not necessarily intentional. I mean, if you were installing an air conditioner and dropped it out the window and it crushed someone, that's a homicide, but it's not necessarily murder because there was no malice aforethought. It was just boneheaded, improper installation of the air conditioner. So all murders are homicides, but not all homicides are murders, right? And so what we're talking about here is intentional, calculated, cold-blooded murder. And when you're distinguishing between subtypes, the number of victims is what experts have used to try to distinguish between the different types, the different phenomena, right? Mm. And then within those, they're all different subtypes based on motive. And so, like, for example, it was established at one point that the killing of 3 or more people separated in time by a cooling off period, which itself needs to be properly defined. Some people say about a month or more. Some people say a week or more. Some people say, even just a few days. But I say a cooling off period should be at least a month, would be my opinion. Although in the database we say a week. So serial killing is the killing of 3 or more individuals separated in time by a cooling off period in the service of abnormal psychological gratification, right? And then that definition changed more recently so that you only need 2 victims separated in time by a cooling off period, but the motive doesn't matter, which I have a huge problem with, because to me, a serial killer should be motivated by something like perverse sexual gratification, a desire to dominate and control victims, to play God, to level the playing field because of some past hurts. But now the way the definition goes is like a guy who's simply knocking over delis and killing the owners to get rid of witnesses, what I call elimination murder, would count as a serial killer as long as there were 2 or more separated in time by a cooling off period. I have a huge problem with that. Now, that's serial killing. Now, I'll tell you, some of the audience will be fascinated to know that just to sort of set aside how serial killing is different than mass murder, serial killing did not get its name from the idea that you kill people in a series. That's a myth. It came from the idea of the old movies that were called serials or chapter plays. They were these brief movies that they used to show before the main picture, the main feature in the 30s and 40s in the theater, like Charlie Chan or the Lone Ranger or the Green Hornet, and later on and things like that. So that, Captain America. And the whole point was that the type of killer who was killing for no reason other than fantasy and expression of the personality was like one of the villains in those serials, in those shows, in those movies, right? So you were called a serial killer because you were like the villain in a chapter play. Fantasy was so important to you that you might as well be wearing a ridiculous costume or writing letters to the police like they used to do in those movies and things like that, right? Or taunting the public. So that the idea was to capture that you were like a paragon of evil, right? Later, because the word series or serial also means a sequential killing, it's stuck, but the public understood it to mean, and a lot of experts understood it to mean, just that you're killing in a series over time. Now, how is mass murder different? And within that, spree killing, how is that different? So mass murder means that instead of having those cooling off periods, you're killing multiple people at the same time. In spree killing, those people are spread out over multiple locations. And in mass murder, it's all in one location, right? So how many victims does it take to meet that criteria? Well, if you were to ask, for example, Dr. Burgess or John Douglas or Ressler, who was deceased, or Alan Burgess, Anne's husband, who co-wrote the crime classification manual, they would say 4 or more victims for mass murder. Other people say 3 or more. I use the 3 or more definition.
Why?
Because I found that you wind up with a lot more cases that you can analyze. I think it's useful. But I also think it has to do with the idea that we found no distinction between the 4 and 3 in terms of motivations and other, mental health and other kinds of elements. So that since there was no difference, we went with the larger sample so we could learn more. And but if there were a difference, we would distinguish. Now, there are many cases of what people call mass murder that should be really more accurately defined as spree killing. For example, the Adam Lanza killings in Sandy Hook is not a mass murder, a spree killing, because he killed his mother first in one location and then went to the school and shot it up. So that's a spree killing. Another example, Elliot Rodger. Elliot Rodger, not a mass murderer, he's a spree killer, because first there's the targeting of the roommates and the stabbing, and then going out, right, elsewhere and using the car and all that. Another example, Charles Whitman, the inaugural mass murder, some people say, of the modern era, up at the at Texas A&M University up in the tower, right? That was a spree killing. He started out stabbing and then proceeded to shooting. So we want to understand that mass murder is about 3 or more people killed in the same time in the same place by any mechanism. Most people, and in a lot of the studies, are really only interested in mass shooting, but I'm interested in all kinds of mass murder. People that kill with bombs, people that kill with fire, people who kill with poisons, gases, stabbings, all kinds of mechanisms. And I've heard some pretty outrageous things. As a matter of fact, killing without a gun is associated with way more victims because the average is boosted by things like a person who crashes an airplane because of his own particular emotional difficulties and kills everyone on board. Right. That's a mass murder, right? 9/11 was a mass murder, right? We're coming up to the anniversary of an event I remember like it was yesterday because I was personally so touched by it. And but I will say that I think this then launches us into a great place to start, is I think we have to make a distinction, and we do in our database, between mass murders that are personal cause in nature and ones that are associated with gangs, terrorism, state-sponsored. Like, for example, the Nazi death camps were mass murder, but we would not study them in the mass murder database because they were not personal cause. Personal cause is where a private individual in peacetime decides to commit this kind of act. Sometimes when a war breaks out later, you go back and you look at some personal cause offenses and you redefine them as acts of political violence that later precipitated something else. For example, the mass murder perpetrated by John Brown and his gang before the Civil War is viewed by some people in the context of that war, but it was a mass murder.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? So that's the whole thing. So they can get reinvented. So already you want to start to understand all these really careful distinctions that you're going to have to make. So we're looking at personal cause. We're looking at killing 3 or more people in the same place at the same time. And we're looking at all things, not only shootings, although most people tonight are probably going to be interested in the shootings.
Yeah. And I mean, it is a subject that is, you know, kind of hot. And we are going to discuss that portion of mass murder and spree killings. Yeah.
Yes, I mean there has been a spate of them lately.
I know.
Even within the incredibly growing bump of these over the past 2 decades, especially, there was like a huge bump in the last week.
Mm-hmm. I believe they're still looking for somebody out on the freeway.
I noticed that in both of these cases, the Georgia case involving the 14-year-old and the case on the Kentucky highway, where the weapon was the AR-15 or AR-15 style weapon, which is probably going to come up from someone in the audience today about why somebody would choose that particular type of weapon, a weapon of war, essentially, for a personal cause, mass murder. Mm-hmm. Right? What's the symbolism of using a weapon of war and the potential to take that many casualties when you've got a personal gripe and these are total strangers in most cases, right? So we'll talk about that too.
Sure.
And the other thing I want to touch on is the symbolism of a lot of aspects of mass murder. You know, where you choose to enact them, who you target, etc. This is very, very important. So it looks like you want to pitch the book or something because you've
Oh,
got
absolutely. Yeah.
Oh,
The new evil, which is Dr. Michael H. Stone and obviously our very own Dr. Gary Brucato, is a fascinating read for the people that are watching and interested in this subject. It is absolutely riveting. It's dark, but I mean, this is a dark subject. Somebody asked earlier too, and I was going to ask you this: do you ever have nightmares?
well,
Now I know that's
I
personal,
usually don't
and
talk
I'm
about
not
that.
saying
Although
you're in
I'm going to touch on it a little bit in the new book,
your
actually.
feetsy pajamas. I'm not that, that's not what I'm talking. I'm just saying, I mean, does this stuff ever really get to you?
Well, one of the things that Michael used to talk to me about when he was mentoring me was that it's not really possible for a human being who isn't a psychopath, let's say, right, to experience these things without having some kind of limbic reaction to them as a person, right?
Mhm.
But you kind of get trained the way that an MD does who's doing surgery or a cop does or whatever. You tell yourself that in the interest of the greater good, you're exposing yourself repetitively to this stuff and getting kind of numbed out
Yes.
to it acutely. But what he explained to me, and of course it is very true, is that it really wouldn't be normal to not once in a while have it seep out in the same way it does for people that have trauma, right? And so it's not abnormal for me to talk to experts who will say in private, yeah, I had a terrible nightmare. Oh, sometimes, I heard this news story and, it really got to me on some level because it became symbolic of all of these cases, and I was able to kind of reconnect to the feeling of what sometimes a parent of a child who's been killed or someone who knew a victim talks to you in such a way that they kind of plunge into the heart and really remind you what you're talking about, that these statistics are humans, and they'll
Sure.
say something that just kind of gets it, and of course you have an emotional reaction, but you just sort of have to put it into a compartment or you won't get anywhere in the, what I mean? It's like that's why you don't see too many doctors, weeping while they're, performing a surgery.
Hmm.
It's horrifying, right? You people have a way of compartmentalizing like that. And so I think, every once in a while, of course, as a human being, some cases especially get to you. In fact, the topic of the book writing is I'm writing about 25 cases that were so bad, famous cases, not private cases, that were so bad, so disturbing, so bewildering, so confusing that I want to try to make sense out of them for the public and myself by writing kind of individual essays on each one. And they will be cases that most people will never have heard of. They're not cases that were on the front page, but they are beyond disturbing in that way that would send us groping for words like evil. Really, really, really disturbing stuff. And I always say, Michael and I always used to say, we weren't really dark people. Actually, anyone who knows us knows we're pretty bright people. We love life. We're friendly. We're warm. We're jokey and cultured and everything else. But we travel in the darkness. I'm a traveler in the darkness, but
Hmm.
I love it, and that is because there is this kind of shield of compartmentalization, and because I see myself as going into it trying to help.
Yeah, and I think that probably, kind of like, when you come from, either tragedy or deal with tragedy, you also appreciate life a lot more because you understand how delicate it is. And so I feel the same way, coming from where I've come from,
Oh yeah,
and I cover cases like Barry Morphew and Dee Warner. All those are very near and dear to my heart.
yeah.
But, and a lot of people say, well, that's probably it's actually not triggering for me because it's kind of it's my life. So
I think maybe it's how you're dealing with it.
I mean, yes, that helps too. Yeah.
Right, because it's like a kind of undoing, right? So, like, there's a tragedy or an injustice in one place, and if you could help someone else, maybe you can undo it. It reminds me, for example, of The Silence of the Lambs, where Jodie Foster's character has some vague idea that if she could save Catherine Martin, who's in the oubliette, somewhere in Jamie Gumm's house, that it would save the lamb that she couldn't save, who, of course, we all know, even though Dr. Lepter never pushes her to say it out loud, is her father. The saving of the lamb would have been saving her father, who was killed by a burglar that he surprised. He shot to death. And so she figured if she could save the lamb, she could save him. And then, the idea is that one day, if she saves Catherine Martin, maybe she won't hear the screaming of the lambs anymore. Well, I think a lot of us do that. We channel it into helping other people. Altruism is a real way of processing past pain. I think.
I mean, I tell people the mistakes that I think that were made that contributed to the death of my mother. And so what I do is I say, look, if I can give you any advice, if you're in an abusive relationship, leave quietly, tell one person, but do not tell, your abuser, because that's a huge problem. And I've done that many, many times. I will always say that. But yeah, you kind of get forged from what from your experience, and I never really shied away from it. But at the same time, I was a little kid. I couldn't do anything about it. I didn't, and now that I'm older, I can tell people from experience what you should do, because I've experienced it.
Well, the W.H. Auden, the brilliant poet, famously said, "I know what all school children learn: those to whom evil is done do evil in return." And I've always been very impressed by people who have had evil done to them, who somehow manage to be better to people than people have been to them. That is a very, very difficult thing. I think sometimes the public doesn't understand how life could twist a person in the direction of darkness and how much it takes to be pulled in the other way. Usually it's because you've had a person in your life that was the opposite person in your life that taught you goodness and caring about other people and so forth. I have no doubt, for example, you must have had someone like that. Right? Yeah. Well, there you are. And I think that's, we have to remember those people who loved us into being like that, right? I mean, all of us have them. Well, except some deeply unfortunate people. And
and that's the thing too, is that the reason that I would say turned out halfway decent at all was because there were decent people that cared about me and showed me a different side of life and love and protection that I didn't know for a really long time. So I mean, you're 100% right, and not to get off track or anything, but when we are talking about we have this 14-year-old boy, who is now charged with 4 counts of murder. And I mean, how do we as a society help these people, these children? I mean, I have a cousin who experienced the same exact thing that I did. He was there when it happened, and he hides from it. And because of that, it has almost ruined his life. I mean, through addiction, through, masking his pain. And he didn't have that same, his mother didn't die, but he had the same support, or he didn't have the same sort of support that I had,
Yeah. Right. Well, some people are saying in the audience that they've been through some dark things and they didn't have anyone that kind of loved them.
Sure.
They just sort of said, I want to be better than that. And I think that's marvelous. I mean, that's to be commended. I think that's a great, extraordinary blessing, a virtue, really, to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It says an enormous amount about some people's character. Well, to answer your question is a little complicated, because you have to understand what Michael Stone and I meant by our construct of new evil, which it's interesting sitting back and seeing people realize that there was some validity to this construct that we put out there. And what we proposed was that something was changing in the culture, particularly in the Western world, from the 1960s onward, that was creating a new era in which, first of all, new technologies were making it possible to create new types of offenses or perform, really awful deeds that simply couldn't have happened before, like the internet, right? Or certain, the wide availability of certain types of firearms in the public, or even things as specific as, like, as I always say, the microwave. As soon as the microwave was invented, it was used to kill infants, right? China Arnold killed her infant in a microwave. Couldn't have happened if that technology didn't exist. And so you wind up in the era of new evil with all kinds of new offenses, cyber stalking, cyber bullying, and identity theft online, etc. And then, of course, there is the idea that there are offenses that occur now that have always occurred, but in the period since the 1960s in the Western world, they have occurred with enormous frequency, and they have occurred with a far greater audacity and horror than they did previously. Or there were offenses that could have happened before the 1960s, but you can rarely find any cases of it, right? And mass murder is one of these offenses that, for non-political reasons, was very rare, extremely rare, prior to the 1960s. And after the 1960s became increasingly common, by the time you get to Columbine, you start a kind of lift, a gradual lift in terms of frequency, where you wind up with something that would have been front page news now being like buried in the newspaper because it's so frequent that it's become almost humdrum to the people who hear about it.
Yes.
And that the reason that that's so important is, remember the way that Michael Stone and I define evil was that evil had to do with something being so extra, so beyond, so unnecessary for some practical thing that you were trying to accomplish through crime, or something you were trying to escape through crime, that it was done just for pleasure or personality or fantasy, that it shocked and bewildered you because it didn't even have a human tone anymore. So what happens when something becomes so humdrum to people that they're no longer shocked? The implication is that the degree of evil we associate with it gradually drops, and therefore we become less and less concerned about having to immediately stop it. It becomes sort of like the frog analogy, the frog in the pot. If you were to heat it very rapidly, the frog would leap out because it would know that it was going to boil. But if you gradually heat it, the frog will boil to death without even realizing it. And that's what's happened to our society is that since that period, there's been this kind of slow boil, so that we're at the point now where you can open up the newspaper to page 8 or 9 and read something like, a man and a woman got into a fight after being together for several years, and the man decided to kill her, dismember her, and eat her, and keep the parts that he was not going to eat in the refrigerator for 3 days until the police arrested him. And then it was discovered that he had killed someone previously who was buried in the yard. That kind of thing.
Yep.
Those kind of stories used to be extremely rare, like, in our culture. Now they are pretty frequent.
Yeah, people don't really listen to the stories.
Yeah, and serial killing had the same kind of explosion in the post-1960s period, particularly the sexual kind. Most serial killing is sexual in nature. There was always sexual sadism, but before the 1960s, killing for sexually sadistic reasons was very rare, very rare. People will say, what about Jack the Ripper? What about, yeah, of course, there are always exceptions, but you can count them like, a couple of, fingers. Right. And then you wind up with this huge explosion, which of course is cultural, because why doesn't it happen all over the world to the same degree? And the fact that it does not happen with the same frequency across all of history is what helps rule out that it's biological, and therefore rules out that it's mental illness. It has to be cultural and personality based. And I'm convinced that the personality of the average individual is becoming increasingly more narcissistic, more coarse, less inhibited, less interested in things that require more than impulsive thought. And I think the entire society is training people to be like that. Forgive
Yeah,
me, Kierkegaardian and me
yeah.
hate
Well,
our culture. Yeah.
and something like this, that not just like mass murder, but like mass casualties. Like you'll turn on the news and you'll hear about a tsunami that took out 5,000 people, and you're like,
Right.
eh. I think a lot of that is it doesn't directly affect you, so it's not really that big. I mean, it's a huge deal, but it's a bigger deal to the people that have
Of course.
endured something like that. And so I think we're desensitized as long as we are sort of one off, like one step away from something like that, until it actually comes knocking on your door. Like a lot of people will say, well, you know, these are tragic things that happen, but, and then you could go, well, until it happens to you, or something like that. I mean,
Well, yeah,
am I
I mean,
off there?
I think the point that was being made earlier about how experts who have to deal with this stuff all the time get kind of numb to it adaptively happens to the whole society. If we were to have alarmed reactions to every tragedy that we heard about, we wouldn't function. You have to stick things into the unconscious to be adaptive. In fact, it's probably why we developed an unconscious. There are a lot of things that if you were to think about them, you wouldn't be able to do certain things. You need to make them unconscious. I've always said OCD is like a disorder of not being able to put things out of consciousness that most of us can. So, simple example. Let's say one day you went to a restaurant and you became acutely aware that the fork you were putting into your mouth, even though it's been washed, has probably been in thousands of people's mouths.
I
Now,
think
let's
most.
say you thought about that.
Yeah.
It would become so gross to you that you might even start thinking, "Ooh, I'm going to bring my own utensils. I never thought of it that way." Now that's something we all do, but we just put it into the unconscious. Another example is if you've ever ridden on a subway or public transportation, if you or slept in a hotel bed and actually thought about how while you were sitting there or laying there, you are being mobbed with microbes and sometimes even tiny mites and things like that all over yourself that could make you sick, that can give you an allergy, that could make you wouldn't go on those things. You wouldn't go in the hotel room. You wouldn't do so. Now I've made you all conscious, right? But you take those things and you put them over here. And what happens to a society, I think, is exactly the same. If we were to say, "Wow, I could leave the house today and be a casualty of a mass murder because they're getting increasingly common," I think we just wouldn't function. So we just take these things and we put them here. The trouble with that is that it leads to a mass ignorance of certain dark realities, right? That's the thing. Now, fortunately, mass murder is relatively rare, but you will notice that we are getting to the point in the frequency that most people have either been affected by one or sort of indirectly know someone who has, right? So, for example, you and I do a podcast with Chris McDonough, right? Who has
Yes.
talked publicly about his son being involved in a mass murder, right?
Yes.
A mass shooting. Um, the Polito mass shooting, right? I was directly affected in terms of people that I loved and lost by 9/11, which was a mass murder incident, right? Have you known someone who's, well, you know Chris, who's son, do you know someone who was even more closely affected by a mass violence incident?
No, I don't think so.
So out of the three of us, two of us have been and one hasn't, right? And I
Right.
think that little microcosm is probably what you'd have in the audience and what you'd have in the world.
Yeah,
Because
I don't
frequencies,
know the mass murder. No.
right, but certainly murder. And all three of
Murder,
us
no
are
question.
some
Yeah.
way by that. So I think what I'm trying to say is even though there's that frequency of hearing about it, you also want to put into perspective, it's not like you can't leave the house without being affected by a mass shooting. They're not that common yet. But if we keep increasing the way we're going, I have no idea if we're going to get to a point where being outside is the Wild West. Hopefully not. Now, all of that having been said, you asked about this particular case, this 14-year-old. Now, I'm going to be careful about what I say about it because we have minimal information, not someone I ever met, right? And I'm only going to speak very vaguely about
Yeah, and and just for the audience, you know, I'm not interested in a gun debate or anything like that. That's not what we're
right,
talking
right,
about.
right,
This isn't. I want to, as we talk about it, it's an isolated incident
Right.
that and that's what we're here to do.
Well, this is what I would say. When we look at mass murder on the scale that's presented in the new evil, which Michael's scale, which I then worked with him to change and expand and so forth, to include a lot of things other than just homicide and sexual assault. The way we think about it, that Michael and I thought about it together, is that there's a very big difference between a mass murder that is committed by a person where the premise for the offense is something that's not rational, that does not exist in real life, right? A person who is doing it as an immediate impulsive expression of feeling where there isn't much thought, like they get upset about something, pick up a weapon and go out and commit a mass murder or do it in their own house. And the kind of person who plots and schemes over time, which is a much more malicious person, right? And what we know about this particular kid is that he was thinking about this for a long time. He had the thought a year ago, and then in that nest of his in his house, waited and plotted and schemed and then did it, enacted it. That is a much more malicious thing than the kind of mass murder we hear about where someone gets activated emotionally and just like heads to a school with a weapon or goes out in the street and indiscriminately kills. And one of the things you start to see in people that are more rational and more cold-blooded is that they have clearer targets. When you have random targets, like you hate the whole human race, you go out randomly in the street and you're just shooting indiscriminately, there's a kind of disorganized quality to that. Your feelings or your mental illness have made you not have a clear target, right? It's just the whole human race can't. Or you could just be such a misanthrope that you want to go out in a blaze, killing just about anybody, on your way out.
Misanthrope, that's the word of the day.
Misanthrope, like a person who hates people, right?
Yeah.
And whereas this kind of person sits back and says, let me think about how to do this in a few months. How do I get the weapon? How do I fool people into thinking that I'm not a threat anymore? How could I slip it into the school? Now, we know, for example, that he almost certainly concealed the weapon in the bathroom because he went to the bathroom, came back with it. So Godfather style, there's got to be a firearm hidden in there somewhere, right? So you have to imagine somebody who's plotting, scheming, fully. And if you plot and scheme like that, then the motivation is not really emotionality and impulse. It's more a malicious hatred or jealousy or something like that, right? And so what I think you want to think about is, how does a 14-year-old get like that? What happens to a 14? Now, by the way, did anybody else notice that the boy was named after a gun?
I did.
All right.
I found that.
Or a horse or something, right? But his name, I mean, for goodness sake, his name is Colt. Right. I remember you saying, I wonder if his name is Colt Winchester.
Right, his middle name, yeah.
Right. I thought that was very interesting. But you really begin to smell being raised in a culture or a home in which firing a gun would be an expression of, I don't know, fun, manhood, strength, whatever. Imagine, for example, the father purchasing an AR-15 platform weapon for a Christmas present for a child. Now, that is a whole other debate and conversation to have. But just think a moment about that, right?
Well, I talked about it a little on my last show, so if you want to go back and listen, I go into heavy detail about it. But you're right, it is a different subject.
Right, but it's also, I mean, from a spiritual perspective, it's an absurd warping of the message of Christmas, right? I mean, literally, this is how I think about it. It's Christmas morning, right? So the Christians among us, what are you supposed to do on Christmas? Christmas is a date that has been set aside as the particular day that we reflect upon the notion that God, who cannot be contained by the whole of the universe, humiliates himself to go into a human, a baby, in a filthy manger, surrounded by animals and the lowest of the low, shepherds, people that no one would want anything to do with, reeking to high heaven, literally. And in that crib is an incarnate God looking up at stars that he himself created and having to talk in baby voice and make little baby movements and whatever, limit himself out of love for his own creation, right? And to celebrate that, you say, no better way to do that than to get a weapon that could pop off lots of those people in a minute. I think there's a perversion, almost a blasphemic perversion of the essence of Christmas in that really bothered me enormously, because it showed in this very dark and twisted way how lost the messages of of that of that holiday and what it says about humanity and the purpose of life and etc. So, but anyway, but I guess what it means is the symbolism is that the Christian message of God coming into the world to save people is celebrated by an instrument of death that eliminates people
or things.
and, right, that executes people, that is a lot more like the use of a crucifix than dying on one. See, and that bothers me enormously on a psychological and philosophical level. Now, setting that aside, I must say that I believe this boy was failed, because people who have personalities like that don't get that way for no reason. They're invariably bullied, mocked, isolated, hated, ridiculed, overlooked, etc. They're angry. They're and the question is, did anybody care about this kid? Now, I'm not saying that's an excuse by any stretch. Let me be clear, by no stretch. But I think some of these people are failed by, institutions, mental health, etc. I have found in my own work that severe mental illness, characterized by loss of contact with reality, psychosis, is actually extremely rare in mass murder. Extremely rare. In mass murder widely, it's in about 12% of the offenders, and in mass shootings, only about 8%. If you screen for mental health where you're looking for psychosis, which would red flag you from getting a gun, at best, you're going to capture 8% of these people. What about the other 92%? Well, what it is most of them, we found statistically, are far more likely to have previous criminal history, to have used drugs or alcohol, right? So there should be screening for those two things. And the other thing that you should be screening for is a life event that's going to set the straw on fire, right? The precipitant. So whenever you look at a mass murder, you think you have this seething, isolated person who goes out and finds like this one thing that gives their identity a sense of purpose, that glues them together, that makes them have stability and structure, because they're not getting it from loved ones or friends like the rest of us, right? So they find this one thing, and when that thing gets taken from them, they snap, because if I can't have it, why should you?
Mm-hmm.
So what you always ask yourself with a mass shooting or a mass murder incident is, what is the precipitant? And by the way, there's someone in the audience who's pointing out that it's a mischaracterization to say that the AR-15 is a weapon of war.
Yeah, I don't care.
I think that's fair, but let's just say you don't need an AR-15 to kill a deer for dinner.
Gary, I don't care about that, because you can go have your gun debate somewhere else. We're not talking about gun debates.
I couldn't care less, but it's not that I don't care about the topic. I mean,
I know, but people want to come in and grind their axe and be like, well, that's not what we're talking about. I mean, it's just not.
No, I think it's a very valid point, but that it's a technicality, but these are technicalities that are used to justify things that I think are immoral. So I'm not going there. Yeah, but I will say this, because as I said, there is no practical application for an AR-15 in society. What is its utility? Do you use it to kill a rabbit for dinner? I mean, what are you trying to do? Blow it into high heaven? I mean, roast it? It has no purpose. So, but let's not get into that. So what I think is that you always want to say, what is the precipitant of the event, right? So, for example, the Brian Kohlberger case. If Brian Kohlberger is guilty, he's a mass murderer who happened to use a knife, right? So with Brian Kohlberger, when I was profiling him, which I did before they ever caught him, right? And I'm proud to say I think it was a pretty good match for him if he's guilty. First thing we said was that there'd be a precipitant for this guy. That this would have been a socially isolated, odd guy, with a temper, who people would find peculiar, right? And who would have a snap. Something would make him kind of snap. So what is that precipitant? In his case, what it looks like is he was going to lose this TA position, which could have even led to getting in some serious trouble with staying in school, because of the way he was using the position reportedly to play out hostility toward women, right? So you grade women differently, you play out misogyny, etc. And so for him, I think the precipitant was that, right? That there was going to be that loss of control through. And so you always want to think about that. So what was the precipitant for this 14-year-old? We don't know yet, but we'll find one. We'll find one. And sometimes the precipitant is revealed symbolically in the date that is used or the location that is used for the mass murder. Think of Nicholas Cruz committing his mass shooting at Parkland on Valentine's Day. I doubt very severely that was a coincidence, right? I mean, it starts to hint that the motivation had something to do with bitterness surrounding that kind of thing. Social isolation, love, so forth. And so I think we want to understand that even though there is culpability, there's no question about it, you have to view some of these people as failures of a system, to not catch them, to not have them properly on the radar and then shepherded to proper resources. And, you certainly don't want to throw oil on the fire by arming a person where there's been a warning.
Right. I mean,
that's a whole other story.
That is something that yes.
Right. It's problematic. And it sounds like the mother warned the school.
Jeez.
So, there's a lot.
Remember when Eric, I believe it was Eric Harris's father, called the school while the shooting was going on, and he said, "Hey, I think my son is the shooter." I mean, do you remember that?
Oh yes, I certainly do. What were your thoughts on that?
I think that a lot of these parents know their kids a lot better than they probably think, and there's a lot of denial until things kind of happen. I mean, I know I would probably feel that way as well, but the difference is that Eric Harris's dad, as far as we know, didn't buy him a gun for Christmas. Now, and once again, I want to say that this is not a gun debate. Guns are out there. There's nothing that I can do about it. Even if I say bad, good, doesn't matter. That's not what I'm, so.
Well, we have to respect that there is a constitution and there's a Supreme Court.
I'm not even.
I don't want to. It's like if we were to come on the show and have a debate about abortion. I think there are certain topics that we should sort of put over here because we have to respect the fact that people in the audience have mixed feelings about this. All I am saying is that I think it is fair for the average person to say, I understand that we have that right, but I scratch my head to contemplate what purpose there is for such a weapon in polite society. I have no idea. That is one of those questions that I cannot answer, Johnny. But I think that there's probably a reason it doesn't make sense, right? Because we want to have them and then come up with these ridiculous justifications to be able to enjoy them. Because they are some expression of strength or virility or security or something else. And it doesn't help that, you've got half the culture operating on sheer fear all the time. Because if you make people afraid, they have to defend themselves. That's how they feel, right? Sure. So I understand that. And therefore, I don't feel we should judge anybody's opinion on it. And that's the reason we're not avoiding the topic because we want to be, despots about what people can talk about. I just think it's respectful of other people. That's it. Yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about. And I just think we want to respect other people. Now moving along, where would you like to go in the discussion? You want to talk a little bit about any particular case?
Well, so you're I kind of want to talk about the database and the research because are you not you're writing another book?
I am indeed, yes, and some of what was learned, which has been published, will be included in there. And as I said, I thought one of the important takeaways was the ridiculous exaggeration in the public's mind of the relationship between serious mental illness and committing a mass murder. As soon as there's a mass shooting, you start seeing the newspapers and so forth using the word deranged, crazed, etc. They are not almost ever deranged and crazed. What they mean to say is that the person has a personality problem or is overwhelmed emotionally and has no coping skills, which is a kind of mental illness, but it's not psychosis.
Right.
People who have schizophrenia and conditions like that are far more likely to be victimized by violent crime than to commit it. Right? Where what my own work has shown over time is that you worry the most about psychosis and violence immediately after first developing the condition when you're not taking treatment, when it first erupts, when you first have that aha, now I know the truth, those people are talking about me, these people are stealing my brain waves, that kind of thing, and you get agitated about it sometimes. But it depends on the kind of delusion that a person has, and it has to make sense to them that defending themselves in that violent way is part of the system for them. But then once individuals like that are treated, it's only when they're not taking meds or using drugs or alcohol that people with those kinds of conditions are going to go out and do anything like this. Another proof that it's not really related to psychosis and serious mental illness is that the average age of a mass murder is about 37. If it was related to psychosis, it would happen when people were like 18.
Yeah, so that's a good point. And because I was, you have this 14-year-old boy, sometimes, and I would think something like that would just take even longer to manifest into somebody. I mean, he's not even half the age of the average. I mean, what could speed up that process?
Right. Well, it's interesting. I mean, first of all, when people are from early puberty until your brain is kind of locked in late teens or early 20s, it's kind of undercooked, right? It's not ready for prime time. It has a poor braking system. It's not solidified, right? So, like, for example, think about marijuana. Marijuana, when used by people that are 20s and onward, is not going to have the same effects as it does on somebody that is a minor through late teens, where it can actually alter the brain in a portion of people who have predisposition to things like psychotic illness, things like that. But once your brain is kind of pruned and solidified, it's a little less dangerous, right? Now, I'm not saying everyone should run out and light up. I'm simply saying that there's a change. Well, because that your brain goes through that kind of process of pruning and then
if you got them.
Right. So Ghostbusters. So the idea being that that's the window where there's the greatest danger. You want to shepherd people through that period to prevent them from developing any kind of serious stuff. And then once they get a little older, you don't worry as much until the dementia days later on, when the brain deteriorates, right? In some people, or senility. So that's the whole idea, is that the braking system is poorer in these people. So that when you see someone 14, 15, 16, 17, 8, like that, you start thinking there was an impulse control problem, they had unmodulated emotions, and some social stuff was probably going on, right? That's the age when you start getting interested in romantic partners, most on average. It's the age when you might be using drugs. It's the age when you might be developing something like depression, anxiety. It's the age when you might be socially isolated or having trouble in school because the work gets harder. It's that soup in which some of these people begin to develop that resentment. And those people need resources. They need someone who notices. I have to tell you, it's corny, Josh, but it's true that I have had people, and I've said this elsewhere. In fact, I turned into a meme, if I remember correctly, for saying it, is that I have had people who have told me that because I was kind to them in therapy, that it prevented them from proceeding with a violent thing they were thinking about.
Yeah, I don't think that's corny.
They said, well, what I mean is that kindness matters.
Yes, kindness goes a long way, man.
I have had people say things to me like, last week I was thinking about X and you were nice to me.
Sure.
And then I stopped thinking about it. And what does that tell you? It tells you that for a lot of these people, the issue is lacking stable, predictable love objects. For a lot of these people, the issue is I don't understand how to make something care about me stably. I don't have an environment in which no matter what I do, someone cares about me stably. So I'm going to make you care about me stably, whether it's in this life or by turning myself into a Wikipedia page because I've gone out in a blaze. One way or another, you will know I was here. I'm going to carve on the tree of life, so and so was here. And that's what you want to get is that you can preempt that stuff by going in and saying to a person, I care about you. You are here. Whenever I see a homeless person on the street, and anyone who knows me knows that I always know them all, I have a very soft spot for the homeless. Every time I meet one of them, I ask them their name, and then I remember it. I say, "Hey, Joe, how you doing? Oh, somebody gave you a coat. Oh, Mary, how you feeling? Oh, yeah." And I've had some of them say to me that it means the world to them that anybody even remembers their name. Well, the reason is that by doing that, the philosophical act that you are playing out is reminding a person that they have humanity and that they're not garbage, that somebody cares about them and notices them, right? And I cannot tell you how important this is. And I know, you're not going to go to Congress and say you want to stop mass shootings, be nice. And that's what I meant about the corny thing. But what I mean is that on that small individual level, where these things are happening in the real world, in a real place with real people, in a real drama, be that person that extends kindness. Like Shakespeare said, so shines a good deed in a weary world. Right. And I don't know what you think about that, Josh, but
Well, I'll tell you that
yeah,
it mattered. It mattered to Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold when they were on their rampage. I mean, they came across kids that they liked, that were nice to them, that they let go. Not saying that that's going to be, but even monsters realize and recognize kindness and appreciate it a lot.
right.
And I know exactly what you mean when you're saying, sometimes people just need, you've had those situations where people say, I just needed somebody to talk to, somebody to listen, somebody to just,
Oh,
go, yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Not even that I understand. I'm listening. I'm here.
It means the world. It means the world to people because you know what it is. There are people in the audience. I mean, can you believe it? There's actually people in the audience saying, "Yeah, but if you're nice to people, and they're nice back, that's how they get taken advantage of.
Right,
That's
right.
how people take advantage." And that's exactly what it is. Is that we live in this culture where people think that meanness is strength. I have to gravitate towards the person who's the meanest, and they'll keep me the safest. This is, of course, a ridiculous absurdity that dates back to the days of cavemen, the troglodyte days, that the person who could rip a mastodon apart with their bare hand should be the leader of the group. I don't agree with that notion. I happen to think that strength comes from kindness. That is not a weakness. It is not virile to be a jerk. And but of course, there are many people, this is why psychopaths stay in the gene pool, who think that the meaner somebody is, the sexier they are. Because meanness feels like someone protecting you because they'll be mean to your enemies. And it feels like predictability because they're never going to be nice. You always know where you stand with a jerk. A kind person that loves you could leave you. They could find someone else who thinks that they think is wonderful and thinks they're wonderful. So it's much more attractive to be drawn to a jerk. And and that's part of the trouble with people is that that when they're looking for that anchor, they gravitate towards the wrong people. This kid, this Colt Gray, was obsessed with Parkland, reportedly. So why would you gravitate toward Nicholas Cruz as a hero, right? Why would you identify with him? Somebody has to come in and say, I'm going to introduce you to a healthier rock to cling to than Nicholas Cruz. Right. And so these things on the small level are what leads to the macro of a whole society that's become infested, with this kind of stuff, infiltrated with this kind of stuff. And but I'm trying to tell people you're not going to be able to go out and change the world on a large level, most of us. But you could do it on a small level. You could love one person. You can prevent one act of violence.
And you can clean up your own little portion, of the world, clean your corner. And you're right. I mean, kindness. I, I wonder if there's ever been an instance where somebody was so kind to somebody that they went out and just said, you know what, I'm gonna go commit a mass murder. Now, I think the opposite could be said, that people feel slighted and picked on, and that could not be the reason that they do it, but it could ignite the fuse, to do
That's right.
something like that. And so, I think that a lot of the times we do get kind of lost on not being friendly or understanding or whatever it is that we need to be. But I mean, a kind word goes a
Well,
long way. I've said things I've had conversations with people that I don't remember, and years later they come up to me and say, I had a conversation with you a long time ago, and you were saying, faith. You said something like faith is just like the wind. You can't see it, but you can feel it.
right.
And they go, do you remember that? And I go, I honestly, I don't, but it sounds like something that I would have said. And, they said, well, I've never forgotten that. And I've also had that happen with others where I said, do you remember? No, I don't remember that. I said, but it always stuck with me.
Well, you've said things that I remember that I found helpful, that I found kind and compassionate, and hopefully I've done the same.
You have, we had we don't have to go, we had a very personal conversation the other day that, I've chewed on, and it was a good conversation, and not a conversation that I would have with a lot of people, or respect, other, not respect, but take to heart. Because, and that kind of leads me to this question here, because I did find it very fascinating. Let me see here, because I think it is a good question. Serious question for Dr. B that is time sensitive. Actually, if your predator is a family member is on his deathbed, do you advise to make amends or leave it alone?
Oh,
And this kind of goes to what you and I were talking about the other day.
This is such a difficult question, because
Well,
that is a personal choice. That's a personal choice. I don't think there's a black and white guideline for it.
Sure.
I will say that if a person authentically is sorry for some horrible thing and cannot go back in time and undo it, but would if they could, tearfully says to you, I need for peace to know that you forgive me for this, and you know that if I could live a few more days, I would do everything in my power to undo this. I think for me, I would try to find it in my heart to forgive. But I can understand a person who feels that they can't, because it's very easy to say sorry for some people, but they don't actually do anything to undo the horror, right? There's a story that's told, and I'll try to give you the brief version of it, but it's something to meditate on. And I love this story because it really makes you think. And it goes like this. Did I ever tell you the story about the wooden board and with the hammer? Okay, good. Otherwise you'll be bored. But it goes something like this. There are two neighbors whose yards are separated with a small wooden fence. And one neighbor is a pretty nice guy, doesn't really do much to bother the other one. But one of them is a kind of a jerk. And he's always throwing his beer cans over the fence and other garbage. He plucks fruit off the tree that's like dangling on the other guy's side, and flowers off of the rose bush that's growing on the other side. He makes a lot of noise. He has wild parties till crazy hours. He's nasty. He's yelling inappropriate things. He's mean to his kid. He, just a terrible guy. And what happens is the neighbor comes over to talk to him about it and explains to him how many times he's felt hurt by this man. And he says, I didn't even know I was doing anything wrong. That's just the way I am, love it or leave it, whatever. So one day, the man says, the nice one says, just to give you an insight into how many things you do that hurt me, I'm going to get this giant wooden board and I'm going to nail it. I'm going to, hammer it into the ground like a scoreboard. And every time you do something offensive to me, I'm going to put a nail in that board. So about a month later, there are hundreds of them. Like they don't even fit on the board anymore, practically. And this gives the man a kind of insight. And he says, wow, I've really done that many things that have hurt you. You know what? I'm going to reflect on this. And I'm going to apologize for every single one of those things. And by one, he comes over the fence and says, I remembered something I did I shouldn't have done. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. And each time the other guy pulls a nail out of the board. And eventually, after a few weeks, he's gotten enough insight that that board is now empty. And he says, am I forgiven now? Have I made up for everything? And the other guy says, well, the nails are all out of the board, but what are you going to do about all these holes? Okay.
That's right.
Now, what's the meaning of that story? The meaning of the story is it's one thing to say you're sorry. It's another thing to make compensation in some way, to make up for the hole that you created.
Or you can take the nail out, but the hole exists.
That's it. And I think that what is so hard for some people is they're going to get the nail removed, but they're not going to get the reparation.
Yeah, my grandpa used to get pissed when I leave holes in the wall without, like I tack stuff up, and he's like, "You got to putty over that."
Right, exactly. But you get the point. And so what I'm saying is sometimes it's not possible because of time for a person to fill that, but you get the sense that they would if they could.
Well,
and
look,
if that's the case, I would be open to saying, all right, I forgive you. Go in your peace here.
Yeah.
But the person is not dying. I would say, I would like to see you do something to try to fill that hole.
And the conversation that we had was about forgiveness, and it was about forgiveness of my father. And, I don't mind talking about that ever or anything like that. And and, the advice was exactly the same, I mean, that's obviously the personal part, but is like, has this person, have they offered a true apology? Have they tried to make amends? And that's a big hole that will never get filled. It's impossible to do, but a lot of the times forgiveness isn't for the one that created the hole. It's for the person that's trying to stop.
Which is what I was explaining to you the other day.
It's for somebody who's trying to plug the hole, to try and stop the pain, and sometimes you just have to forgive, even though that person's not sorry. That's a hard thing to do.
So that
you can heal.
Patch up the hole. Right. If for the people in your audience might be interested in reading William Blake's poem, The Poison Tree, which is about being angry with somebody and trying to kill them, and then it turns on you.
Right.
And that's the whole thing. So it's a very hard question from probably a very personally touched person to ask such a question.
And not one that has a great answer.
I hope it was a good answer, but
I get what you're saying, but that, when you say I don't know, you don't know if my father's sorry, or you don't know if her perpetrator is sorry. Only we're the ones that have to figure it out. It would be the same thing as you have been wronged by somebody. Do you forgive them? Well, I don't know. Are they sorry? That's up to you to understand, and I get that.
I love that Ginger Snaps talking about Robert Frost. I'm stealing Robert Frost lessons. Well, maybe in a crypto amnestic way, where not consciously, but I love Robert Frost. I'm an enormous fan of Robert Frost. One of my favorites.
Have you ever read a book by Robert Frost?
Well, Robert Frost was a poet who wrote many poems.
Yeah,
I'm a very, very big fan. So, but because I think that poetry has a special way of conveying truth.
It's very healing. I know that.
Well, I mean, because it's there's something almost mystical about how there's meaning hidden behind it that I find very.
I'm showing that picture.
What, with my books?
Yeah, it's my favorite.
Oh. Well, I might as well tell them what you're talking about.
So you're writing a new book.
Yeah, two actually. One with the Cold Case Foundation and one alone.
And you're reading 700.
No, not 700, but enough. That's the stack in one of my rooms of about a year's worth of reading that I'm doing
If it wasn't for that throat rug, it would look like a prison cell.
Well, I have in my home about 6,000 or 7,000 books.
Oh, you have a library. That my school didn't have that many books, Dr. Gary.
You only need 1,000 books to meet the definition of a library.
Yeah, so you have 7 of them.
Yes, but as a kid, I used to keep a Dewey Decimal System on index cards. All my books were organized. It was very funny. If you borrowed one, you had to sign the index card.
Really?
I would hound you until you gave it back. Hound you.
You're like the book inspector on Seinfeld.
Oh yeah, Philip Baker Hall. I love him. Yeah. Let me tell you, buddy. Yeah. Right. But in my day, but yes, books are very important to me, and
I love that. I love that you had to sign.
One of my all-time favorite things, one of my all-time favorite memories of Michael was that I was moving books with him because he had thousands, and hidden behind in a box, as if it were a dirty thing, was a Kindle. And I said to him, Michael, I would do this too. He's like, I can't even bear the thought of anybody thinking I would read without having an actual book in my hand, so I hide it. And he hid it in the, like it was like the dirt, like it was a turd hidden in the, which I think is hysterical. But I would never, I mean, if somebody bought me that, it would be like a gag gift. Because the experience of reading a book, the smell, the one of my favorite things is buying a book, opening it up and finding something in it that was left by the previous person. Like if you go to a used bookstore and you open it up and there's a receipt from, someplace, or or a ticket stub, or a old photograph. Those are the best. An old photograph totally out of context or something. I just love them. They're little treasures.
It's like I like opening old baseball cards with the gum from 1987, and I chew the gum.
Yeah.
It's disgusting. It goes, the smell, the formaldehyde, just everything that goes with it. I get what you're saying. Not that I don't read like that. And, I asked you the other day, are you one of those people that read while watching TV? How do you have...
I read all the time. I'm like Burgess Meredith in that episode of The Twilight Zone. Like if I could, I'd like lock myself in a vault through a nuclear explosion, and then be happy that now I finally had time to read,
right.
With the stacks, Dickens followed by, remember that scene. And I kind of get that because, but as I think it was Thoreau said, read the important books first. In other words, you don't read frivolously. You read books that are important lessons for life. Then you read the frivolous crap. But the thing is, there are some books that are so goofy that there is truth in the goofiness. Sometimes a silly children's book can be deeper than, for example, I defy anyone to come up with a book with a greater spiritual message than The Runaway Bunny, the children's book, right? Or The Giving Tree, or one of these kind of books, right? So, but I think that books have been friends to me for many years. A book is like a friend. It's the thoughts and ideas of a person, and you're opening it up and you're getting to know them. And I love it because it's totally one-sided. They're never going to hear anything about me. It's totally unselfish. I'm only going to hear about them, right? In the privacy of that room, I'm just taking in that person's thoughts, and they're never going to hear my reaction. And it's interesting to think about that way.
Yeah, we gotta let me just bring up a couple of these questions, and we
sure.
Really quick. Dr. G, can you tell us a bit about how you are using AI to analyze your data? Do you do that?
That's something that another group, the research group at Boston College, which actually I'm part of, with Ann Burgess and Victor Petreka, they're using AI to look at the manifestos of people that might commit, who did commit mass murder, as a way of predicting the writing styles of people who might go on. It's going to be very interesting to see what comes out of that work, that AI work, because eventually the goal would be that when people post online or social media or something, that it would get picked up as like being in that style or having themes consistent with people that we know did go on to commit these offenses. My concern, of course, is the civil, liberties kind of issue, and the issue that there's going to be a lot of false positives.
Mm-hmm.
But this boy, this Colt Gray, he is somebody who was caught because of writings he was doing, and it was certainly a true positive for him. But I think that's where AI is going to come in handy, and also to kind of look at patterns, and it's sort of like earthquake prediction. There do seem to be these weird patterns, and like some states have more of these things than others, and certain regions have more of the, and there are a lot of questions about factors that could make a mass shooting incident more likely in one place than another. But the jury is out on them, and what I worry about is that the research may have a bias, because if you're funded by a group, a private group, that group may be a group that tilts in the direction of not wanting it to look like, let's say, people that are not mentally ill are going to commit mass shootings, right? Or you may be very pro-gun, or you may be a government agency during an administration that's very right-wing, that kind of thing, or very left-wing. And so it biases the research. I'm interested in the research irrespective of politics. I couldn't care less about that stuff, right? Put it over here. I just want to get to the truth.
Right.
And I think eventually what will come out of this work, especially now that we have data sets as large as the one that we worked on, is I think it's just a matter of time until it works its way up to the upper echelons of government, and then they start coming up with decisions about what seems to be associated more with risk, red flag laws, gun rights, etc. But
right.
The excuse has always been, there isn't enough data, that kind of thing, and you worry about the politics getting mingled in with the fact. You saw that, for example, during the attempts at science during COVID. Right. I mean, in the middle of people dying, people quibbling over political crap, right? And so I think that there is that that stuff happens, and I think we have to avoid that, because the fact of the matter is, mass shootings are an epidemic. They are a public health concern.
No question about it.
Right. So take the politics and toss them out the window. We have to, right.
But that's kind of what it gets on my nerves, and about that is that, like, I know a lot of people are very passionate about the Constitution, and I'm fine with that. But we got a lot of other things that are issues too that people just don't give a damn about. But don't you dare talk about my gun, and I'm just not here to do that. I'm just, it's not, I own 2 guns.
Nothing wrong with that if you're allowed to. You're a responsible person in a state where it's legal, but the problem is that there are a lot of things in this world that you need a lot more proper licensure to do.
I agree.
And to own, you should at the very least have to keep proving you're not abusing drugs, you're not abusing alcohol, you know how to use it properly, you know how to lock it up properly, you're not exposing minors to it, you're not, etc. Right?
Yeah.
So you haven't had a psychiatric hospitalization, whatever. The fact that is seen as impeding on a person's civil liberty, to me, is bizarre. But the trouble is, of course, it gets into political stuff, and the fact that it's political has to do with the fact that there's a multi-billion-dollar industry in the distribution of these. So keeping people afraid is very important for a lot of people to get very rich. And I think it's sad that people who fight over this don't realize that there's some fat cats out there that are kind of going like, oh boy, billion today because we terrified the public,
Sure.
But it has serious moral consequences, and I wouldn't want to be them on the day they have to meet their maker.
Right.
That's a lot of holes in the board.
Well, until that day, we have Mimi J2 here says, you're a nerd, Dr. Gary.
Unabashedly so, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, the only thing higher than Dr. Gary's IQ is Snoop Dogg at the MTV Movie Awards. And I mean, I don't know what your IQ is.
It's just silly.
I know.
I think,
Easy.
listen,
It was easy. It was like I had it in the back of my head. I was like, am I gonna bust this out? I thought about it before. I was like, I'm gonna save it. Well, there you go.
well, as Thomas A. Kempis said, I would rather feel compunction than know its definition. I think that there is a greater wisdom in being a person with a lot of feelings and caring about other people than knowing a lot of trivia. You know, we live in a culture where if you go on a game show and you can say, you know, you can answer a question like, how many times is the word one written on a dollar bill? And how many times is it typed out versus how many times is it a numeral? You know,
Mhm.
a washing machine or a car. The reality is I would much rather live in a culture where people cared about things like each other, right? The number of factoids that you develop, you know, that you know in your brain at the time you go into a casket really doesn't matter very much, in my opinion.
Right.
But we mistake that for intelligence, which is disturbing to me. So what's the
This is
question?
a great question right here, Dr. Gary. Are you seeing a lot of violent video games associated with mass shooters?
This is an extremely controversial question. This is something Michael and I thought about, and we felt that it's a little bit of an exaggeration, you know, to say that, you know, just playing those games is going to make you go out and commit mass violence. The problem is that for some people who already are of a certain turn of mind, there is something desensitizing about violent games and videos and movies and whatever, because your brain doesn't know the difference. Your brain, like, for example, if you view pornography, your brain does not know the difference between you having relations with a person or vicariously reacting to something on the screen.
Right.
And, you know, it's like I always tell the story that I went to Florida, one of these amusement parks, and they had a simulation ride where they simulated being chased by a tyrannosaur. And after the ride, I was online and somebody tapped me on the shoulder to ask me if I liked the ride. And I jumped. I went, you know, because my brain didn't know the difference. My brain thought I was being chased by a tyrannosaur. Consciously, I know that it's not real, but on an animal level, there's a desensitization that's going to go on because you're experiencing it as if it's real. So I think that for certain kind of people, there is a desensitizing quality. For some particular offenders, they have had a serious effect. For example, Adam Lanza was deeply obsessed with video games and had the idea that he needed to kill a lot of people to get a high score compared to other mass shooters who in his mind were like the other people playing against him in a video game world. And if he got killed, someone else could take his points. One of the reasons we know that he targeted children was that he could rack up a very high body count very quickly and have a high score. He was keeping track of them on a spreadsheet. So you want to understand that it's a case by case thing.
Right.
To say that it's like 100% causal, no. I think like anything else, you want to kind of take it case by case.
Yeah, and that's like, especially even in this Appalachia high school situation, this is a, this is not a normal, and there's no such thing as a normal, school shooting. Trust me, I'm not saying that, but this one is out of the ordinary of stuff that even you have studied, correct?
Which one? This 14-year-old?
Yes.
Well, the age is unusual.
The age and the
It's not
involvement.
unheard of, but it's unusual. I mean, I'm aware of even younger kids who have committed murder, and for sometimes pretty vile reasons. But the thing is, what's unusual about it is the idea of how the firearm was acquired and that they're charged being pressed against the father, and how it's become, in this heated pre-election political environment, fodder for arguments over ownership. And right, what'd you say?
I think that's sick, by the way.
Well, everything, everything, illegal immigration and everything gets used as a political point.
No question.
But if you just are talking about it from where we're trying to come at it, I think you wind up with, I think, a more balanced kind of in the middle approach. Anyone who is Dr. Bean deserves more than and this, but just showing up my
That's what
that's thank you, Lord Joe. I appreciate that very much. Um, but yeah, that's unusual. But other than that, a young white kid, being pissed off, angry, plotting and scheming to commit a violent act with a AR-15, unfortunately, is becoming.
It's not as rare. Like the bell tower shooting, right? You remember, obviously.
Charles Whitman, you mean?
Yes, and
Right.
he they ended up finding out that he had I believe it was a tumor that was causing, just crazy
Affecting judgment, affecting the impulse control centers and judgment in the brain. Actually, there's some. I remember hearing that may have also been true for Stephen Paddock, the Las Vegas shooter who committed the worst mass shooting in U.S. history. Is that he may have had a tumor or a brain abnormality of that sort, but there was no explanation for that mass shooting.
Right. I know that was something. Dr. B. Colt's mom got a weird text from him that morning and drove 200 miles towards him because she was worried. So someone did love him a lot. And I'll just say this really quick, and then you can follow up on it.
But why was she 200 miles away? Remember, the point is not are you loved. The point is, are you loved consistently and predictably
and nurtured and cradled if necessary. I mean, I'm not saying that his parents didn't love him.
We don't know that, right?
Yeah,
we can't know.
There's a lot of different types of love out there, I mean,
right.
sometimes love's not enough, because you can love somebody and treat them like absolute crap.
But sometimes that's how you try to make them a predictable object. If you break the legs out from somebody, they'll never leave you. It's like Kathy Bates in Misery, God, I love you, and then she breaks his legs with a sledgehammer. Right. There are some people who do that, right? So sometimes the person who's treating you like crap is doing it because they're afraid of being abandoned by you, which implies that you have power over them.
Well, that was in the Maya Miliete case. I don't know if you're familiar with that case, but the husband was going to this like dream spell or some spell caster. Right. I don't know what the hell it was, but
what did you think of that story?
I think it was awful. It was terrible. I mean, it just because it involves children again, and the children were used as leverage in the case, and and as he would go and pay in Bitcoin for some spellbinder to put her in a wheelchair so she couldn't leave him. I mean, that's just as sick as it gets, if you ask me.
Right. Well, attachment is at the heart of a lot of crimes. It's one of the things I'm going to write about in the new book, is that there's an underemphasis on stalkers, serial killers, etc. How a lot of what they do, we think it's always about sex, domination, control. But it's also, I think, about making people predictable, always knowing where they are, having control over when they're going to abandon you or dislike you or whatever. And that's very central to the anxiety a lot of these people have.
Yeah, and I think that was a big thing with my father, was that if I can't have you, nobody can, and that is a tale as old as time when it comes to these kinds of murders. I mean, it is they call it crime of passion, but you're right. I mean, it's a control thing. You're not going to leave me. I'm scared if you do. Right. And a lot of times, this is just from what I've noticed, that that people get together young, they don't know any better, and then they realize, like, I'm with an absolute loser. And then you want to leave, and that absolute loser is a lunatic on top of all of that, who does not abide. You're mine. You made a commitment to me. You married me. You're not leaving me. And the only way that you're going to leave me is, if I'm the one that makes you leave, and I feel like that is
right.
Let's see. And Muddy Paws, thank you so much for that donation. My 13-year-old son plays common video games for that age. I'm playing with him, and when a character was killed, all the players jumped on the body, virtually peed on the character. I was shocked. This shows our kids are becoming desensitized to the aberrant behavior. I agree with that. It's also like the movies as
Right.
well. You know, the movies are so realistic these days that everybody's kind of desensitized to it. Like we were talking about the other day, like a John Wayne movie. You know, they shoot a guy in the chest, he falls off his horse, and then he dies. That's pretty much it.
But you see what you're touching on actually is the issue of toxic masculinity and the idea that we live in a culture where, as people become more aware of psychological truths, philosophical truths, etc., they're supposed to be becoming a little bit more sensitive. The more educated people are, the more sensitive they are. And what winds up happening is that a lot of people say, now you're a wussy. Now you're letting people walk all over you. You're making these ridiculous excuses for people who aren't like you.
Right.
And, you know, it's interesting you said John Wayne, because John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer John Wayne Gacy, who was gay, was called John Wayne by his father because he wanted his son to grow up to be a strapping John Wayne virility, you know, icon.
Yeah.
And he winds up marrying a woman who was a total beard and denying for a very long time his homosexuality and projecting it onto these poor victims, right, who he views as objects of hatred and, you know, and deserving to die. And, you know, but the whole thing is, you have to understand, John Wayne Gacy was a closeted man and had, from the time he was a child, been taught that he was fundamentally a horrible human being. Now, you know, it's important to understand the dangers of toxic masculinity in our culture. And that is very tied to any discussion of guns. Because, you know, that's the whole thing, is that they are tied into the notion that taking them from me is like neutering me. It's like stripping away, you know, my masculinity, right? Michael used to say it's not a coincidence that missiles and guns are shaped the way they are. Right. Well, you know, it's like, you know, so that's the whole thing. Like you want to understand that, you know, that there is a little of that psychologically going on. And like the person saying, you're trying to take away my manhood, you know, the thing I use to protect myself and the thing I have, you know, and I mean, come on. I mean, that
includes rocket ships.
Yeah, I think so. and the conquering
to infinity and beyond.
Right, exactly.
That's pretty funny.
So, you know, and using them to blow things up.
Thomas Randall, my guess would be that it's probably Grand Theft Auto, which has been a huge controversial video game for years. And there's some countries that have banned it as well. And you know, you know,
the comments are so funny that people write sometimes.
They really are.
You got some real pips in the audience.
No question about it. Let me see if we got here's Dr. Gary. How many books do you read at one time? Yeah, is that something you do? You read more than one book at one time?
I try to read. I mean, I don't usually talk about this, but you're asking me.
Yeah,
I try to read like 3 books a week, but the thing is that sometimes I am reading them at the same time, and you know, and I very quickly, because a lot of times you're not reading to retain everything. You're reading for like those chunks that matter, right? Like it's sort of like, you know. You get the premise, you get the basic bullet points, you know, and the conclusion, and you don't have to remember all the observations and all that, although sometimes I do. But I think reading a very great deal is extremely important. Life is very short. You don't have enough time to take all this stuff in. The reason I do it is I like to synthesize when I write. I like, if I write a chapter in a book, I like it to synthesize, you know, maybe 15 or more books or sources or articles, whatever,
right?
Instead of just being based on 1 or 2 people, you know. It's
interesting. Well, you know, I mean, I find 3 books a week. I mean, God, it takes
sometimes 2. Sometimes if I'm busy with other things, 1.
Guess how many books a week I read?
You do a lot of things in a week, Josh, that I don't do.
That's true, but I mean, little Calvin and Hobbes. I could get one through those.
Calvin Hobbes is not to be sneezed at.
I'm not saying it is. I'm
Calvin Hobbes,
saying that's not
named
real
after two
thinking.
philosophers for a reason.
I know.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm telling you, Calvin and Hobbes. I've been reading those forever, but I could get through one of those a week, maybe. Depends.
I don't believe you.
I don't know, man. I like that. Let me see. I'll tell you. See what book I had. It was written by the henchman for Whitey Bulger.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I got that one. This is my second time reading it, and I do read some books, but golly, not like, I mean, this.
I like to read. It's not for everybody.
No, this isn't liking to read, Dr. Gary. This is different.
Yeah, see, Miss Marple says, when you're single, it's easier. in the garden of life, if you think about it, it's not possible to go out into the world and love every person and do all the good in the world. You can't. What you can do is do it in the small scale. I always thought that was the spiritual significance of why people have relationships and get married and have children. It's to teach you with one person what you're going to have to do with everybody in the next life. That you have to love everyone in that way, that intimacy, right? So the idea is, imagine having to have that kind of closeness to every living soul, and we couldn't do that. It's not possible. So you just do it with one. And and that's the whole idea. If in the garden of life, we all get a task, right? Some people do the weeds, some do the ivy, some people build the wall, some people dig the dirt, some people plant the vegetables, whatever. You can only have one task, right? Right. So what's your task in that garden?
Chasing the bison would be boring too.
Well, what's your task in the garden? You only have to have one, right? Remember, Luther King Jr. said, if a person is called to be a street sweeper, he could sweep streets like Michelangelo painted and Shakespeare wrote.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you're a street sweeper. You have a role.
And it's if you take pride in that and do it properly.
And you use it as a means of goodness.
And
you go sweep streets and stop people and talk to them about their day and have an effect on them.
You think parents like cleaning up Cheerios that kids spilled on the floor? No, but it has to be done.
And it's a great act of love.
Absolutely.
It's a great act of humiliation. It's a great act of condescension. Remember what we said about Christmas? We've all got to do that. Become small. And so I think that's the whole idea. The mass shooting is all about becoming big. It's the illusion that you are more valuable than other people's lives because you are bigger than them. And the firearm is a mechanism of being real big. But what I'm interested in is the kind of people who want to be small. That's the idea. Love is about becoming small, emptying the self, not filling the self up and becoming puffed up. And that's the point. That's the sickness of the AR-15 being given as a gift on Christmas.
Right. It's not the day itself.
Yeah, it's the perversion of the symbolism of that day. Right. That day is about smallness and giving and emptying of the self. And the gift you give is, here, son, here's a mechanism of puffing yourself up and taking other people out of the world. And that's disturbing.
It's funny you say, that you do it, you do things. Both of my dogs, Macho Lucas and Otis Joshua, this week had kennel cough. And it's a pain in the ass. And if you know anything about kennel cough, it's not super harmful, but what they do is they'll cough and cough and cough until possibly they'll spit up some foam or whatever. And I spent a lot of the week with baby wipes cleaning their faces and sitting there go, oh, the little baby, I'm too tired, and I'm telling you, they sit there and they just go, oh, it made them feel so much better. Like if I was to go, oh, you little, while they're not feeling good, I mean, that is going to be, a pain in the butt. But, as I'm sitting there and I'm going, it's okay. And, I'm sitting there. And my son's going, "You're sick, dude. Like you're mental." And I'm going, "I'm comforting him, okay?" Like it's just like, and I would say, "I used to do it to you when you were sick." You know, I mean, and it always made you feel better. And who doesn't love to be loved and taken care of?
Right.
But let me
Right.
see here.
Now, one thing I want to say, because I like to be even-handed and not alienate people, and there are people very dear to us that talk to us and have different ideas about this, right?
Sure.
And I think it is important to understand that there is a large portion of the population that would make the argument that I think is worth considering, right? That if perhaps you were to wrangle firearms out of the hands of everyone in the public, that a person who was intent on committing such an offense would probably find a way to do it anyway. And I think that is a valid point. That is
Mhm.
something worth thinking about. And that is why such people would, I think, reasonably argue that perhaps the failure is not at the level of the instrument, but at the level of helping the individual who uses the instrument. The the counter argument, of course, would be made that it gets easier when the person is given a tool that has no function other than to play out the desire to kill other human beings.
Yeah.
And so that is a debate that I think is really valuable. And I totally respect it. I really do. I want to be crystal clear that I don't want to ever be one of those people who thinks he knows everything and everyone else is an idiot. I think, who am I, right? I just have my own opinions. You have your own opinions. We'll have our own opinion. I just want some smart people to get together and make decisions that lead to us not having, dead school children.
I agree.
I don't know how else to put it. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Do you ever see what happens to a child who's shot with a gun like that?
Yeah,
Like,
unfortunately, I have. Yeah.
or not see, but even like read about
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
happens. And it's let's just say you
It's
don't want to be
horrendous.
one of those parents. You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? Yeah.
I absolutely do know what you're saying. Um, yeah, I remember when Sandy Hook happened, and I remember hearing it. I was on my way back to work, and I was driving in my little Ford Ranger at the time. I had I was listening to ESPN radio, and they interrupted it, and we're talking about it, and I remember my heart just sank, and I remember just saying, I don't know what the answer is to this, but um I'm on the side of, like, we gotta do something. Just it was I couldn't wrap my head around it, man. I really, even to this day, struggle with those kinds of things. The loss of life is one thing, loss of young life is another. I mean, things that are preventable, that shouldn't really happen, and you're right. I get it that it is relatively rare until it happens to you.
That's right.
That's the problem. And the people that yell the loudest are the people that haven't been affected by some of those situations. I can guarantee you that if it was you that had to put your child in a casket, you'd feel different, no matter
Oh,
how you felt about it before.
I was just reading some of the comments. Yes, there's no question about it, and I think everything we do always has to be dedicated to the victims. Josh, you have a perspective on this because of personal experience that a lot of people don't
Mm.
understand.
Yeah.
But you have to understand. I mean, just so the audience understands the notion that you could have a loved one, person that means as much to you as each one of us has one of these. I hope that person who, like, you can't even imagine life without them. Them not being in your life would be like finding out that Tuesday didn't follow Monday anymore. Like, your life just wouldn't make sense without them in it, right? And one day they're out in the world, and a person who's just going through their own thing that has nothing to do with that person you love decides to pluck that person out of the world, shoot them with a bullet, take them off somewhere and assault them sexually, torture them to death, sometimes even do things worse than that. And you have to understand, like, that there is someone out there who's going to come home and be like, hey, and look for that person and go to talk to them and find out that they're not there. And not only are they not there, but they were pulled out of the world in a way that is the worst imaginable thing. And sometimes it's a child. Sometimes it's a perfectly innocent, grandmother, an elderly person. I mean, I always think about that. Like, what on earth did these people ever do? And then you talk to these offenders, and the way they justify it makes you want to vomit. I mean, I remember somebody went to go talk to the serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells, who killed a 13-year-old girl in a town, I think, in Texas.
Texas, yeah, he cut her throat.
Sure. Well, no, there were many victims in many states, but he killed her behind some hedges in a park.
Yeah.
And when I said, whose fault was this? Because he was externalizing blame. He said, was it my fault that the city didn't cut the hedges and made such a good screen to kill someone?
Right.
Right. I mean, that's what you do. So just like put into perspective the idea that every one of these victims, we don't even know their names. We know the killers. We don't remember these people's names. That's what's so tragic about it. And every one of these was somebody's loved one. I mean, that's the thing. And then they bury them and are just supposed to move on with their life. And news reporters are coming and shoving microphones in their face and saying, how do you feel about the killer? How do you feel about you? And you're just going like, could you get the hell out of here? Like, I'm trying to heal. Or you're in a courtroom, like you're, I mean, one time, Chris McDonough and I, and Ann Burgess, and Greg Cooper, and Dean Jackson, I think it was, we interviewed one of the survivors of Bundy. And it was fascinating because, the victim was talking about how, nobody even knew her name. Nobody cared about her, as a person and her story as much as they cared about the victim. Now they do, because she's written a book, right? And I think it was called A Light in the Darkness, right? And I want to put her name out there. It was such a good book too. Let's see. Do you remember that book?
It wasn't one of the 4,000 I read that year. But
it was by Kathy Kleiner Rubin. That's it.
I didn't read it, but I know the book.
And we interviewed her, and she's talking about how people they don't know the names of the victims, and they don't and yet you think, for example, like you go on YouTube and you watch a video of the mother of Denise Naslund, one of the two girls that were the two women who were taken at Lake Sam out there in Washington, and she was never the same.
No.
Every day of her life. You know that she never moved her daughter's car from in front of the house, even though her daughter was dead, just in case she needed it.
Wow.
Every single day she said the thought would pass through her mind, what did he do to her? How much did she suffer? How much pain?
She didn't sell the car? Is that what you're telling me?
Never moved it.
Yeah.
She'd say, how much did she suffer? What did he do to her? Etc. Like what how much pain was there, etc. And that woman who wound up dying of cancer was ferocious in trying to get him to admit. Now, she talks, Kleiner Rubin, what she talks about, Kathy, was having to go face him in a courtroom. I mean, think about that. You're trying to heal. I mean, this woman was beaten facially with a log in the Chi Omega house. Her jaw was dislocated and wired at great length, right? And she has to go in and look at him. And right. I mean, just think about that. And she said that he looked kind of small and pathetic to her. But then she said something I always remember. She said, one day you're a victim, but the next day you're a survivor.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Right. And I'd love to hear you talk about that a little more. But Josh, the key to this whole thing is like to put your focus there, and that's proper compassion. And the only reason you care about these killers is because you have compassion for their future victims.
Yes.
Not them.
No.
You're not interested in them.
No, I have a great disdain for, the Scott Petersons and the Dale Warners of the world, and I they hit close to. It's not a fascination. It's a disgust, and knowing that their wives suffered the same kind of fate that I know that my mother did, is heartbreaking. But at the same time, it's you want to. I've talked to a lot of, especially when I was younger. We used to have there was a group that I'm still involved with called Victim Witness, and out here in California.
Oh, you're involved with them?
Oh yeah, yeah. Been involved since
Good for you.
2003, I think. And
Uh,
yeah, and every time a certain situation, that I had experienced came up, there were kids involved or things like that, they a lot of the times they would want to bring in somebody that has experienced what they're going through, and you would go and talk to them about what happened, and how you cope and how you deal, and things like that. And I always, I had that happen to me. I had people come and talk to me about that, when I was a kid, and it makes a difference. I wouldn't say I'm a victim advocate. I was just saying that I have a unique knowledge of a certain kind of crime and domestic in nature that I can kind of offer how I survived it, how my sister survived it.
exactly.
And
You're
it's
a true advocate, in the sense
always
that,
been important to me.
yeah, I think that's beautiful. And it really is, because, it's a way of making use out of a terrible thing, and that's the difference, right? Between there are two perspectives in life, right? You could only get caught up in the darkness, or you could see the light in it. Remember, as Robert Louis Stevenson said, two men looked out through prison bars. One saw mud, the other stars. You have the option, and if you've been through a horrible thing, you could see that horrible thing, or you could look up and see what's above it.
Yeah.
That's the choice, right? Get gobbled up, or see the goodness in the world. And I think when a person tries to hurt you and you survive it, and then you hate yourself or you hate the world, you're doing the rest of the work for the offender.
Right.
You're taking the life away from yourself for them. And it is an act of survival.
Yeah.
Just
I'm actually still,
yeah.
my family is still represented by Victim Witness as well to this day. They advocate for us especially my aunt, who was shot and didn't die, but a part of her did that day. I mean, essentially what happened, and I've talked about this a little bit before, was that when my father pulled up outside and demanded to talk to my mother, and my aunt knew that it was not a good idea because of the things that had been going on. So she went out to confront him, told him to leave.
Uh,
And as he pulled a gun from his waistband while he was sitting in the driver's seat of the car, she started to turn around and she ran, and she got shot through her left lung. Um, and as she was running, she was able to make it around the corner and hide under the deck of another home in the alley. And she was found there, and she had lost several pints of blood. She wasn't a very big lady. She went into a coma for, I don't know. She was out for like 7 days. She was out for a long time, and
no, she was in a coma.
yeah, she was just out, and they put her in one, and her lung collapsed and all this stuff, and it was horrific. And then the first thing she did when she woke up, obviously I don't remember this, I wasn't there, but my grandmother was there. She said she woke up, her eyes popped open, and she thought that it was the same day, right? That what happened. And she started going like this because she couldn't talk, because she had a tube, and she was trying to say, my dad's name. She was trying to say Alex, and she was making the gun gesture. And she kept asking, "Is everybody okay?" Like trying to, and then she was like writing it down. She was they got her calm back down. But you know that she's never been the same, never, never. And I remember at the parole hearing when she was talking. This was at our last one. She was talking to him, not him, but because you can't directly talk to him, you have to talk to the parole board indirectly. You know, you can't like address him and say, "Hey, listen to me," which, you know, that's a subject for a different day. But she said, she goes, "I don't even know why he shot me." She goes, "I was never anything but nice to him." And I remember just looking over at her, just going, "Oh my God." Like,
Probably why. Because if you find someone who's the exception to the dark rule of life and the person actually cares about you, you're petrified you're going to lose them. So, as a final act of possession, the great paradox is that you destroy them.
yeah.
Destroy what you love most. That's the stupid paradox of people sometimes. And, and you have to remember that, you know, your mother lives on right through you.
No
And,
question.
and you have to work very hard to live up to the example of somebody like that, because she must have been a real light in the darkness for this disturbed individual.
She, I have a lot of vague memories. My sister, who was older than me, has told me a bunch of different things, but I do remember that, and I think I've shared this before, but she used to sing to us every night, "You Are My Sunshine."
Oh,
And obviously I love that song, but the kind of the paradox there was I do feel like my sunshine was taken away.
yeah.
And but I have some of that still through my children, through my sister, her children, and the legacy that she leaves behind. My son got married 2 weeks ago, and I would have given both my legs and arms for her to have seen and been there. It just, and there was emotions that I fought because I was like, my mother should be here, but somebody that was supposed to love me and love, and take care of us, took that away. But I fought that emotion because I said, this is a good day. And, um, I wouldn't have been able to do that 10, 15 years ago. I'd have had a meltdown, and I didn't. Um,
Do you really believe she wasn't there?
no, no, I don't. I believe that she was there. I just believe that I could have stood next to her and held her hand.
It's funny, Josh. I've encountered in my work a number of people who are very reasonable people who tell me with great embarrassment in the privacy of therapy that they've had weird, ghostly experiences, but they don't admit it to anyone because they think they sound ill.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about these encounters, which I've sort of collected in a little mental file, is that the theme in pretty much all of them is that these spirits or whatever they're talking to and or think they're talking to, they're not malicious. They just say that they left too quickly and there's something that they want to communicate. And it's always totally mundane. Tell my son to water the plants, take in the mail, and that I love him.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that my mother knows that I'm with her every day and am proud of her. When so and so performed at the play, they were sad because they thought I wasn't there and I was right there. It's this weird thing, this urgency of communicating to the person, even though I'm not here physically, my constancy as a love object remains, and I'll see you again. And people can consider that ridiculous. They can laugh at that. All I know is that people who tell me stories like that are profoundly transformed by them, and they
Mhm.
have peace that comes over them because they come to realize that maybe they don't have to be that afraid, because maybe there's more to the story behind the curtain. And I don't know, whatever it is, people believe whatever they believe. I'm not here to judge. As as Shakespeare said, there's more heaven and earth than there is in your philosophy. I am sure that there is more to the story, but I will tell you that I would take consolation in that idea.
Yeah, yeah, I do, and one of the ways that I know that she stays alive with me, at least, is the even though there's hurt, and the hurt is real, and it can be physical, and
Oh
it
yeah.
can be mental. um, it's just because I love her, and that
Hmm.
she she is a real person, was a real person. She's just not here anymore. And but I am reminded of her daily, sometimes good, sometimes bad, but daily I'm reminded of her. Just like there are many, many of you out there that have lost a loved one, and you you would give anything to have one more conversation with them. And I remember telling my sister, we were having a conversation, and she said, "Well, if there was just one thing that you could say, you know, this was years ago, what would you say to her?" And I would say, "Thank you for protecting us, and we're okay. We made it." And since she goes, she knows that.
Of course.
And it was very powerful when she said that to me, because then I started to think about it, and I go, because she did everything that she could to protect us. I mean, I could get into the weeds of the whole thing, kidnappings, and all kind. There was a terrible. It was a terrible childhood,
She saved you many times, I'm sure.
over
Remember
and over.
that for somebody to be at peace, they have to know that the people that they love are okay.
Right.
And so you living a good life and being happy lets them rest.
Yeah.
You don't have to feel guilty to let it go, because it was unfair. But there's not that you don't have to right the wrong. You simply have to live and enjoy your life as the harvest of this person's life, and then they're happy, and they'll see you one day again in a more concrete way. I have no doubt of it.
Yeah.
And you know it's interesting. And when my father was dying of cancer, my father died when I was fairly young, and he had been in a coma, and we were in hospice and a kind of vigil for him to pass. And I remember anticipating that one day I'd be feeling just like we're talking about, and not wanting him to feel any such thing. I leaned over into his ear and I said, "We're going to be okay. My brother and I will take care of mom. You've done everything you could. You fought the good fight. You're a good man. We love you. There's no problem between us." And he passed away, I would say about a minute after. And I never thought it was a coincidence. Never.
I think he was
I
probably
don't
just
think it's
waiting,
so. Yeah,
waiting for you to say it.
that's it.
Wanted to
You
hear
ever
it, because
you ever see one of those?
I had a conversation with my grandpa, who was my father.
Yeah,
It was
right.
it was a little different, but it was essentially, I'm gonna take care of the family.
Mhm,
It's okay to go." He couldn't even talk at the time, but he looked at me and he winked at me, because that's what he used to do. He used to just kind of winked at me, and
interesting.
I leaned down, I kissed his forehead, and I walked out of the hospital. I went home with my grandma. I told her, "I'm going to take you home. I'm going to make you something to eat," because they were going to go put a new feeding tube into him.
Mhm.
And he died that day.
Yeah. Do you know how many cases I've seen where a person is with the person who's dying, and the minute they step out of the room, the person dies? They go to put change in the meter outside the hospital. They go to take a phone call, do it, and then the person passes. It's almost as if the person does not want them to see it.
Yeah.
This is fascinating stuff that one day perhaps I should write a book about that, about this kind of the things I've learned about death. And, there are the things that stuffy and scientific people talk about out in the open. And then there's the reality of what goes on when you're in a closed room with a person in therapy and they tell you their beliefs and the things they've experienced and the weird stuff that goes on that makes them think that there's more than there is to this life on the surface. And you'd be amazed how many people take consolation in that idea. And I hope you do,
Yeah.
because the reality is, let's be frank, the reality is your mother is enormously proud of you. And I think you've done a very great deal of good in this world that has blotted out, what one half of your genetics could have inclined you to do.
Sure.
But and I think people really need to kind of give you credit for that. I mean, I think do you think there's anywhere else that anybody's having this sensitive of a conversation about what really is at the heart of talking about mass murder? I commend you for that. I mean, offering this place for people to talk about this, I think is very beautiful. And, that is because you know what it feels like to have someone lost to gun violence, right?
Yes.
I mean, let's be honest. So I think that's very beautiful, and so I commend you for it, and I hope people appreciate how rare it is. So
Yeah.
I wonder what people are thinking as they're listening to all this. That they probably feel like flies on the wall watching two people.
Just have a conversation, but essentially, we're talking about something that just millions of people have experienced and have never had that conversation. Like, that's why I'm here, because I talk about tragedies, but I'll talk about mine too. I got no problem with that. Always. I do talk about I don't always talk about tragedy. Sometimes I talk about like Subway sandwiches and things like that, but it's not always tragedy, but I don't mind. Matter of fact, I choose to share the story because I do think it's important to know that people know that you can be a victim and then you can become, like you said, a survivor, and that's a big deal to me because I don't feel like a victim anymore at all. I actually feel empowered. I feel um, strong. I feel my mind uh, doesn't betray me like it used to, because I've worked at it and I've put in work in counseling and all kinds of exposure therapy. And there were some really bad days, and then there were some really, really good days,
Well,
and
that's resiliency, Josh. That's what makes the difference between. That's why you could have a family where there are three siblings, and one of them is a mass shooter, and the other two aren't, but they grew up in the same household.
yeah,
What's the resiliency? Why are some people okay and some people aren't in the face of it? I don't know.
I don't
I
know.
only know that you know part of your the cookbook recipe for you is that you're 50% your mother.
Hmm.
I'm sure that figures into the story. But I love that you've created. I mean, really, I love that you've created an environment where people could talk openly about things that they might feel a little uncomfortable to admit out loud that they feel. And let's face it, we could get into the technical weeds of discussing mass murder and how many victims it takes to meet the definition, and are all guns equal, and is it mental illness, is or whatever. But at the end of the day, we're talking about dead children.
Yep.
Dead children. I don't know what else you're supposed to
And
do.
they're not to be used as political pawns, or anything for you know your beliefs. Well, let's just focus on the children.
Right.
And there is nothing more uh, precious and sacred. And my biggest investment in my life are my children. Not just monetarily, but everything. My son, last night, he was away from home, but he was sick. He ended up with the flu, and he was calling me, telling me, and he's 19, and he says, I think I'm going to go into the ER and get checked out. And I said, okay, keep me updated. It's a good idea. Go get checked out. They'll give you an IV, maybe some anti-nausea. And he goes, okay, well, I'll let you know in the morning. And I said, no, you'll let me know tonight. And he goes, well, it's 1 or 2 in the morning. Aren't you going to go to sleep? No, not until you leave. And he goes, oh, well, you're going to stay up. Of course I am, and because, and I said, I don't care that you're 19. I want to know that when
Right.
you're okay, that's it. And he said, and I remember, so he went and he did that, and everything worked out. He's doing much better today. He got the medicine, and it slowed it down and everything. And he says, he calls me today and he says, thank you for keeping up with me. And I said, don't thank me for stuff like that. But I think I just think it's my job.
Right.
It's my boy, and so.
Doing absolutely crazy thing for your children means you have something in common with God.
I think so. I think, I hope so. And I'm sure tomorrow or the next day he's going to piss me off, and then life will be just the same way, and then he'll be like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, and I'll say, okay, well, I love you, buddy. But the message to him is, and was, and like most parents here, their children are the most important thing to them. They give you, their family, not just their children, just their family. You don't even have to be your children. It could be your brother. I would do the same thing for my sister. I do the same thing for my grandmother. I feel that way,
of course,
about all my family. And I know that most people do as well. Dr. Gary, we're going to get out of here.
Powerful conversation. I could talk about it all night, because I think what you're doing, and I guess a good place for us to end is, I think what you're doing is you're getting right to the heart of it, that if you want to understand what's in the middle, at the center of a mass shooting, mass murder, stop thinking it's about lunacy, stop thinking it's about politics and all this other thing. The essence of it is belonging, being cared about, loved, having an identity, thinking that there's a reason to be alive, that your particular small place in the world is enough, that someone cares what kind of sandwich you ate in the park today, and what TV show you watched, and that you got home safely. If you go out on a date and the person says to you at the end of the day, text me and let me know you got home, keep them.
Right.
You get what I'm saying? Those are the people to look for. The person who says, I can't go to sleep until I know you're okay.
Sure.
Don't be afraid to let somebody in who loves you that much. It might feel suffocating, but that's because it's probably new to you.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I told him, I said, I'm sorry for being overbearing. And he says, you're not that. And he just said, I love you. And I said, I love you too. That's it.
That makes it worth it. Well, all that having been said, I will. Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, maybe you want to tell people about the witness box, and I did want to say that a lot of times people find me, like, my email on the internet, and they write to me, because I don't have social media at this point. I couldn't deal with it anymore. But I can't deal with it. It's like a cesspool of the dim-witted and the kind of troglodyte like, and the completely evil, with a smattering of the goofy. Yeah. And I can't deal with it. It bothers me on every level. So I just want nothing to do with it. But sometimes people find me on there and they write to me, and sometimes those messages are very productive, because they tell me what they find helpful, what isn't helpful, that they were touched personally by what was being said, that they have information on a case that, and they want me to direct them to law enforcement and resources, that they, you know, have their own kind of story that would make a beautiful anecdote that could help other people when I'm out there talking. So don't be ashamed to do that. I like getting messages from people like that. So, I think you do too, Josh,
I
right?
do. I receive a lot of
Yeah,
emails
yeah,
and
great.
uh, I'm sure there are people here in this chat that I don't know. I don't know, like I've never met them in person, but they've been around a long time and been, a supporter and they'll, if they go away for a while, they'll email me and say, "Hey, I've been ill or this or that." And I always make a point to check on those people and because I do care about them. I truly care about people just like the same way you checked on me when I wasn't feeling good, you know.
Yeah,
And
and you
it's
would do the same. You do it too.
I
And
checked on you when you weren't feeling good.
right, exactly. You certainly did, and I appreciate it enormously. Listen, those little acts of kindness are what this is all about, and it is not weak and non-virile and unmanly or whatever you want to say to be kind.
Right.
Don't listen to people who tell you that kindness is weakness. That's BS. It's much more valuable, and I much rather, I'd much rather have somebody go out in the world and force that on people,
Yeah,
to
right.
throw kindness at people than to throw bullets.
Exactly.
Anyway, so thank you so much, and remember, people can reach out, and if you want to talk about the witness box,
The
good.
witness box, absolutely. The witness box is you can find the witness box on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, also here on YouTube under the podcast on my page. It's a podcast between Chris McDonough, Dr. Gary Brucato, myself, and we're kind of like the Tupac, Dr. Dre and Snoop of the podcast true crime world. I'm kidding. Dr. Gary would be definitely the Dr. Dre of the group, and
Okay, Dr.
no,
Gary.
I'm Dr. because
Great.
I'm the
Kind
producer.
I mean, it's an interesting parallel. I will say there is one person in the audience. Well, let's see if I could find their name because it's important. Um, 1 minute. The person is saying that they are, yeah, here it is. Imagine peace. And they're saying that they have a terminal illness and they're feeling very abandoned and people have been cruel and so forth. So, feel free to reach out and, we can chat. I'm very happy to do that. There's something about people who are at the end of life, who are thinking about the things that most of us put out of consciousness in a way that I think makes them profound to know, because they're coming close to a kind of light on the other end of a tunnel. And I like to learn from them and talk to them and to gain wisdom from them and give them some hope. So I would like to talk to you. So feel free to reach out to me.
That is a very magnanimous gesture, Dr. Gary. You're a good man, and I appreciate having you on. And by the way, if you haven't, check out Dr. Gary's book. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it at Barnes and Noble. I don't know any other bookstore names, but there there are some. But any major bookstore you can get the book at. But let me see.
To line your bird cage, wrap fish, target practice.
Yeah, it's a thick book. You could shoot at that thing for a while, probably. Let me see. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thomas Reynolds says Tommy Lynn Sells was pure evil. You're not going to get an argument out of me.
Sure. He was a 22 on the scale. Yeah.
Oh God, he's so disgusting.
Read Diane Fanning's excellent book on him. I think it was called Through the Bedroom Window. It's a wonderful book, and in the process of writing it, she got him to confess to a murder. And also you could watch Dr. Stone interviewing him.
Do you do this, by the way?
Oh yeah, people. Oh, you have no idea the things people mail me.
Yeah.
One time I was on Chris's show, and we were talking about how Some professionals have the Sherlock Holmes style, and some have the Columbo style. Right? I'm. Anyone who knows me knows how much I love Sherlock Holmes and Columbo. I'm crazy about them.
I am acutely aware.
Yes, I'm crazy about them. And so Chris said, "Do you have one of those dirty trench coats like Columbo?" And I said, "No, I don't." And I literally got one in the mail. Somebody sent me a trench coat. So of course, a friend of mine said, "You should have said you needed a Harley or a
Yeah, right.
Corvette or something."
Jet.
Right, but it just kind of popped up. People do send
Imagine you on a Harley.
things. But listen, their heart was in the right place.
Do you wear it?
No, I confess that I confess that I did not. I did not wear it.
Okay.
Can you imagine me out with the cigar and?
It's like when Richie Aprile. Remember when Richie Aprile gave Tony the jacket? The jacket. You remember that whole thing?
Of course.
I took it off of Rocco DeMeo. He's had the toughest reputation in Essex County or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I love all the fictional detectives. I love them all. Poirot. I love Charlie Chan. I love I love Miss Marple. How could Father Brown? How could you not love them?
Dude, you should.
And we will
Halloween.
We will in the future talk about fictional psychopaths.
That is a.
Yeah,
I think my son wants to join that. He loves that conversation. I think
he's the audience. Ask him to give a thumbs up if they'd like us to do it.
We've been talking about fiction. We've been talking about doing a show with fictional psychopaths and
analyze how accurate they are.
And I think it'd be a lot of fun to do that.
We'll take a little poll. Tell them thumbs up if they'd like it, or thumbs down if not. And if they'd like to.
If you give a thumbs down, I'll block you. No, I'm just kidding.
No. Oh, so far so good.
I think people will show up, man. They love hearing you talk, man.
I like Barnaby Jones too. Yes, of course. Yeah. Okay. We got some thumbs up.
You got a fan base here, brother. I'll tell you that.
Well, I think they're your fan base, but that's okay.
I'm their fans.
Well, that's good. So, but I'm glad that people are all saying yes. So, and people can write to me or you and suggest particular psychopaths.
Absolutely.
Psychopaths you'd like to talk about. Obviously, we're going to cover the really famous ones, But if you know any obscure ones, I'd certainly like to talk about them.
Very
okay.
Good. All right, Dr. Gary. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye. And there it is. It was a fantastic conversation. Thank you to Dr. Gary for his time and expertise, and really do appreciate it. And I appreciate all you guys. I know that I'm not trying to keep your opinions down. I just wanted to keep it on the topic at hand, and that's what we did. I think it worked out great, and I appreciate you guys respecting that. Have a nice night. Don't forget, Witness Box. Check it out.